right, Mattie. It's interesting because you've anticipated all my questions, which is good and it's bad, but you've anticipated them. So you didn't start riding until you were 15. I didn't realise that you said that you lived just up the road there.
That's right,
You didn't
yeah.
even know those were race courses, so I'm assuming you didn't have a family that dragged you up here against your will at every opportunity. So how did you suddenly, at 15, decide that how did you discover racing?
So yeah, my mum worked in my junior school. My dad was a builder, ground worker. And the only reason I sort of knew about racing, my granddad loved to bet. So when I went to see my nan and granddad, he'd always have the racing on. But as I say, I never knew. I lived literally 600 yards that way and went to school over the top of the hill there and never knew there was a race course. But we did have family in Ireland and we always visited them over Christmas times, in the summers. We went over there and spent a few weeks over there at a time. And this one weekend, we didn't know what to do. We'd been to the beach and we said, what else can we do? And a cousin of mine said, oh, I've got a mate, he's got some stables, we can go out horse riding. So we all said, yeah, something different. None of us had ever sat on horses. And so we got to the yard and sat on these horses and we went off trotting. And anyway, we started having a canter and I enjoyed it. And then went off into this field. I started cantering and just really enjoyed it. And afterwards, I think he said, oh, you're quite small, you could be a jockey, you're like quite natural. But I just think he was trying to get me to come back the next day and get me to pay for another session because I wasn't a natural. But yeah, I seemed to enjoy it. And he said, oh, you could be a jockey, you're small, and sort of, what's that? And he sort of went into too much detail, but said, like, you work in the yard, you can work in races. And it interested me, my ears pricked up. And at that stage, at 50, I mean, what 15-year-old knows what they want to do in the future. It's a very early age to know where your future lies. Came back here, I was dating a girl at the time, and her dad, he had a connection with the the Charlie Moore yard at that time. He knew someone who worked up at Charlie's, and I was telling him what had happened. And he said, look, if you want a job in a racing yard, there's literally one at the top of Wilson's Avenue. I can make the contact and get you a Saturday and Sunday job. And that's where it all started, really. And went up there with Charlie Saturdays and Sundays, just learning to muck out and clean out the horses. And I was doing that for weekends and weekends on end, every weekend. And lucky enough for me, the kids were very young at that stage. Joss wasn't born. You had Ryan, who was the oldest, Jamie and Hayley. And Gary had been at Epsom, he'd come back down, and they just helped me. We had a pony in the yard, so I learnt to ride on a pony called Clute, and just sort of kept having lessons with girls in the yard and some men in the yard just helping me out. And if they'd sat in this front of the camera now, I know one of my mates who was teaching me to ride. He was like, if I ever thought you would achieve what you achieve now, back then, he said I would have laughed. He said every time my dad asked him how's Matt getting on, he'd go, oh yeah, he's doing really well. And he just thought to himself, I don't have the art to tell him. He said, I don't think he's that good. But I persevered and then started riding out the quiet race horses. And I remember the first name of the good old quiet horse. His name was John's Wager, he was. And he was an absolute saint. And he looked after me for many a morning riding out. So yeah, just progressed from there then. And Gary took over. And then I'd been schooling and I didn't know whether I wanted to go flat or jumping. And then I had my first ride, I think it was when I was 19, it must have been 1996, 97. First ride at Windsor on a horse called Run to Warborn over jumps. And I was hit by the bug then, just absolutely loved it.
And how were the guys when you, as a young jockey going in there for the first time in the weighing room, that inner sanctum, how were they towards you?
Yeah, they're very accommodating, and obviously you'll get in and you'll put in a certain part of the weighing room. You had valets in them stage, and my first valet was John Buckingham, who very famously won the Grand National 150 to 1. The name escapes me. Foynhaven, that's it, the fence named after him now. And so yeah, John took me under his wing, and they were good to me. And then the more and more rides you get, the sort of the bigger lads at the time used to start talking to you and helping you, and don't do this so much, try and do this. And I was very lucky. I listened to them, I learnt from them. and they helped you more. I think if you sort of stood there and never took it in or never absorbed that information that they're giving you, one, you'd be silly, because the font of knowledge in that WAM room, if you can take any of that, it's invaluable. So to take that in and listen and ask questions as well. I was never shy in coming forward. I would always ask questions and what I could do. And John Franken was very good to me. I used to go around to John's house and we used to sit down together, and he used to help me improve. And say, I've done a lot with Yogi Breisner, and when I was at Henrietta Knights, Yogi used to come down a lot. So yeah, I had a lot of people along the way help me. And first and foremost, I've always said it, I'd be eternally grateful for Charlie and the Moore family, for they got me started on this journey, and without them, I mean, a lot of people ask me further on in my career, why didn't you go to a bigger yard, Paul Nichols, Henderson, and the truth of the matter is, I mean, is that I don't think I would have got on anywhere, because I started so late. The big yards would have had lads coming over and lasses coming over from Ireland who had been horses since they were 4 or 5, so they would have had a distinct advantage over me, and I might have not have been given the chances that Gary and Charlie did. So I'm adamant that I was in the best place for me, because anywhere else I think I'd have been overlooked, and yes, there would have been better riders getting more rides than me. So I'd be eternally grateful what they done for my career.
Now, you mentioned John Buckingham, obviously famous for the Grand National as well as being a valet. You didn't actually ride in the Grand National, but when you Google you, some good stories come up. You know, there's one about when you finished 3rd in the Topham on Cossack Dancer. You called Murph in the weighing room at the pre-race pep talk. You remember that? What that was?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so that's the only, not regret. That would have been the cherry on the cake for me to get a ride in the Grand National. I had a couple of near misses. I was jocked up for one. He got scratched. Leighton Aspel had a fall one day on the Friday. He went off to hospital, and he looked like he'd broke his collarbone. He walked out of WAM, he's broke his collarbone. And I'd won on the horse a couple of times before, so I spoke to Nick Gifford. I said, look, Leighton's gone to the hospital. I said, it looks like he's done his collarbone. I said, if he has, I said, is there any chance that I could ride the horse in the National? And he rang me back 10 minutes, said, I spoke to the owners. He said, yeah, it's fine, you can ride him in the National. And I was ecstatic. I was like, well, I've seen Leighton walk out, his shoulders down. I thought he's done his collarbone. So I thought, I've got to ride in the National. And then so we went out that night, as you always do, into town, into Liverpool. So I'm telling every Tom, Dick and Harry, like I'm walking around with my chest puffed, yeah, riding in the National. And then walked into one bar, and there's this fella dancing on the dance floor, swinging his arms about, and I looked over to say, it was Leighton Aspel. And I went up to him, I said, oh, right. He said, yeah. I said, oh, you ain't broke your collarbone? No, it's fine. I said, oh, right. He went, why? I said, oh, I was due to ride your horse in the National tomorrow. He went, oh, sorry. I said, well, don't apologise, you haven't broke your collarbone. But looking back now, he could have gave me that ride. He's won two after that. So, yeah, that was great. But in the Topham, so Topham and National, all the stewards come in and say, right, you have to ride sensibly, don't be silly. Like it's a statistic that if you make the run in and you go too fast, you'll never get round and all that. And on no certain terms, I shouted, well, that's me, absolutely. You can imagine the rest. I said, because I'm making the run. And everyone started laughing, and me and Jamie actually, we made the run in. Mine was a front runner anyway, so I had to make the run in, and obviously the chair was the second fence, and we got to the water, and Jamie said to me, oh, they're going quite quick, Batch. I said, look, do you want me to take back a bit? Or he went, and we were both in a good rhythm, turning around the back to like approach the oncoming fences like with the first in the National. We went, nah, come on, Batch, let's just go for it. And we just had a joy in it. He went out the canal turn. And yeah, I managed to finish 3rd, but I did. So back in the day, we used to have a laugh when we was at the races. When lads wasn't riding, they go down to the fences or the hurdles, and when we used to come over the fences, we'd either be singing a song or make something up or call someone out a name. So just for a bit of sport, really. So on the Thursday I was at Taunton, and I'd seen my horse had got into the Topham. So I said, that's it. I said, and the song of the time that we were singing over the fences was The Police, Roxanne. So I said, right lads, that's it. Tomorrow I'm in the Topham. I said, I am going to give everyone a shout over the chair. I said, that is it. So of course, the rumour mill started spreading. I'd had an interview on the telly actually with Norman Williamson. Said, oh, first time in the Topham. I said, yeah, really excited, Norman. He said, oh, and apparently you're gonna give people a shout at the chair. I said, yeah, I've sort of dug myself a hole now, Norm. I've got to sort of stick to my commitment. So we've gone down to the start, and we've passed the chair, and I promise you now, there was about 30 lads and trainers and lasses down there waiting for me to come over to the chair and start singing this Roxanne. So I was like, right, I can't let anyone down, hate letting people down. So we jumped the first, I was in front, I was coming down to the chair, and I think just by sheer luck, because I think in the whole of my career I never saw many strides, my eyes were shut most of it, I came down to the chair and I just saw this perfect stride, and from about 7 strides out I started the song Roxanne, and they was just laughing, and it went down, and I got interviewed after with Claire Balding, and everyone brought it up that I'd shouted over the fence. So
I read that you described the chair as a block of flats. Now, did you have a look at it before you?
I did, yeah. I had a walk round, and it was massive. But I thought, to be honest, I thought the ditch down the back, what would have been the first ditch in the National, I thought that was bigger than the chair. Probably because it's a lot wider, and it probably does look a bit bigger, but that looks bigger than the chair. But yeah, and I remember going round there, and he gave me he was giving me a great ride. We just jumped Valentine's, and we was going down to the next, and I hadn't seen a stride, and I left it to him, and we was very close to it, and I thought, well, this is no way he's getting over this. So I just shut my eyes, waiting for the impact, and I opened him again, and we're off towards the other fence, and I was patting him. I was like, how the hell have you just got over this fence? But he had a lot of self-preservation. And I remember Tom O'Brien, we was turning around with 2 more to jump. And he said to Batch, yeah, Batch, you've had some spin off him. You've been really good. And I went, Tom, will you shut up? I said, I've got 2 more fences to jump. I've got to get over them 2. But yeah, gladly, I got over them 2, and I finished third. Yeah, it was great. And that's, I've had Cheltenham winners, Hennessy winner, but to get round there, and all I wanted was a picture on my front room wall of me jumping them fences, and it stands proudly now, so I'm very proud of that moment.